Welcome to the next installment of 86th Brigade. I'm Chef Jay, and I wanted to talk a little bit today about interviewing. Now, one of the issues with interviewing is a lot of times in a kitchen setting, you actually want to do basically a working interview. You want to have them actually demo how they do things, have them make a plate of food. Some places do mystery baskets to see like how they think on their feet and what kinds of things they have, plating techniques or whatever. Today, I'm going to touch on that a little bit, but I'm actually going to talk about something that doesn't get brought up as much, which can actually help you tremendously. Because somebody can be a really good cook, but they may not be the best fit. And one way to find this out is through talking to them and getting to know them, asking them very specific questions, and feeling them out as who they are as a person. In corporate speak, you might refer to this as seeing if they're a cultural fit, right? I went in for my working interview at this place. They didn't have salt. They didn't know what product they had. They said that they had fresh product when they actually had frozen product, and they didn't know which was which. One person was having me prep for a dinner service. The other person didn't really know what I was there for, and there was a miscommunication between them. And what they asked me to cook didn't align with what I was going to regularly be cooking, and they didn't really get into the supervisory aspect of being like a catering lead. And because of that, the interview was not what it should have been. And I knew what they were doing wrong because I had the experience. They did offer me a position. I turned it down because the place was so disorganized. It was so bad. If you're going to do a working interview, make sure that you have a set procedure. Maybe test it out on somebody to see if that works. But what I actually wanted to talk about today was a little thing called statement analysis. I've always been interested in sociology, behavioral sciences. I was actually going to become a psychologist before I settled on being a cook, because while going through school, I had realized that I had already been cooking for like 3.5 or 4 years at the time. And I'm like, well, why am I going to pay out the butt for school? I like cooking already. I could just keep cooking. So instead of doing drug and alcohol counselor, psychologist, or whatever, I'm like, I'll just stay on the cook line. But it's always been something that fascinated me. Like, why do people act the way they do? And, you know, within that, there's like true crime and all of these other aspects. Because of that, I follow channels that talk about statement analysis, body language analysis, things like that. And I was thinking to myself a few days ago about how can I implement something that I'm watching and something that I'm passionate about into one of my YouTube videos. And I realized that there's a lot missing from the interview process that I think could benefit people, even people that have interviewed people before. One thing that I've seen these other channels talk about a lot are asking open-ended questions. Now, granted, these are in a criminal setting, and we're not here to interrogate the person. We want this to be a comfortable and fun environment. We want it to be relaxed, and we want to make sure that they're a good fit for the company, but they're also there to make sure that we're a good fit for them, you know, because the interview goes both ways. You're interviewing them, they're interviewing you, as long as they're doing things right. What do I mean by open-ended questions? You might say something like, why did you leave your last job? Usually that's going to give you a very scripted and canned response. They've already rehearsed that. They've looked up YouTube videos about like the 5 most common interview questions. And also asking yes or no questions is another one, because if you say something like, it says here that you left your last job to explore new opportunities, and you kind of like, implying like, okay, I want you to talk, then that allows them to be like, yes, my last job was great and blah, 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 but I wanted to come here and everything's great, and you know, I just am always working on myself, and I wanted an opportunity to show you what I can do. Instead of asking a question that narrows down the talking about the cultural fit, or saying something specifically about a boss, say something like, all right, tell me about your last job. See how open-ended that is? Because they can pick anything in the world now. And I'll leave links to some of them if you guys like following this kind of stuff. I'll leave links down in the description for a few channels that I follow where I've learned a lot of this. A lot of this information is coming from Peter Hyatt, Deception Detective, Dr. G, and Behavior Panel, and a lot of these other things. I actually listen to a lot of these people while I'm prepping. According to Peter Hyatt and Deception Detective and all them, you have a lexicon of 30,000 words, roughly 20,000 to 30,000 words. So when I ask the question, tell me about your last job, I'm not asking you specifically why you left. I'm not asking something specific about any of the employees there or the culture. So what the person that is sitting across from me is going to do is they're going to think of something to say, and they're going to say it. But your job at that point is to try to understand what they're saying and what they're actually saying to you, and don't put any words in their mouth. Allow them to just speak. Because one of the main rules in all of this is most people, if they're being dishonest or they are lying, will not tell you something direct. They will beat around the bush. They'll pussyfoot around it. They will tell you everything except for like the one little nugget of like, okay, so in my last interview video I did, for example, I said that a red flag is when somebody says, my last boss was an asshole. And the reason why I said that is because they are being honest with you that they feel like their boss was being an asshole to them. But what they're not telling you is why that boss's attitude ended up negative, especially if other employees had a good experience. They may feel like they were slighted by their last boss because their last boss fired them for drinking on the job, for example. But they won't say that. So let's use the my last boss was an asshole example. Tell me about your last job. And then they say, well, the job was pretty good or whatever, but my last boss was kind of an asshole, and I had to get out of there. It was way too toxic. And if you listen to what they're saying, they said my last boss was an asshole, which is probably true, and the work environment was toxic. So think about like why they would use the words my last boss was an asshole and talk about their environment as being toxic. Well, toxic obviously implies that there was a lot of negativity there. They perceived a lot of negativity. And their last boss being an asshole doesn't really say anything specific. So what you can do is you can narrow in on that part where he says my last boss was an asshole. So what kind of jerky things did your boss do? Now, this is important because somebody that is being honest will tell you he did this, 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 and this. One thing that they will do if they are lying is they will use qualifying terms. He would do things like yell at me even if I was only like 2 minutes late. Like, what's the big deal? He would only kind of yell at me if I was only like 2 or 3 minutes late. So the word those are qualifying terms. They are telling you that it's kind of like this. He would kind of yell at me because I was like kind of late. If you get rid of the qualifying terms, he would yell at me because I was late. And now, what does yell mean? Am I yelling right now when I'm kind of like raising my voice a little bit and I'm talking to you? Is that yelling, Is yelling just a perceived aggressive response? Or is it that they just pulled them back and they were like, hey, you're late all the time. You got to stop it. And they just took that as he's yelling at me, right? So he said things like this. Somebody that is telling the truth might say something like, well, my last boss used to micromanage me a lot. And then they would give specific examples. One example might be that they would show me how to salt the water. Then I would salt the water for the pasta the way that they showed me. Then they would yell at me because the water was oversalted, even though I used the same amount of salt that we always use. So see, that's like a story. It's a real example. It's something that actually happened. And they would reference different types of these small little examples that happened. In my last video, I talked about workplace sabotage. So if somebody comes in with examples of actual sabotage, most of the time when somebody has something real to say, a real complaint, whether it's harassment or micromanaging or sabotage, they can give specific examples. They can say, well, like back in this stuff's been going on since February. He did this. I felt this way because of it. They'll use emotions when they talk. You could tell that they're getting a little bit pissed off. Like they're actually a little upset about what they're talking about. And they are able to recall very specific things. They can talk about how it felt when somebody was saying something to them, micromanaging them, and how belittling it felt or condescending it felt. Somebody that's lying and they actually were drinking on the job, for example, we're going to use Mark was drinking on the job. Mark will figure out a way to talk about all the ways everybody else around him were bad. He might say something like how his coworkers seemed like they were always mad at him for no reason. Well, they were mad at him for a reason, but he's leaving the reason out. But in his mind, He thought it was for no reason because maybe he thought he was getting away with drinking on the job. See how that works? The key in asking these open-ended questions is you want to look for qualifying statements and you want to look for red herring, deliberately being really vague. If somebody, let's get rid of the drinking on the job thing. Say somebody is lying on their resume about how extensive their knowledge is and how much experience they have. They went over to France and they worked with Gordon Ramsay and some of the best top chefs in the world. They know everything there is about food. So you, actually knowing everything there is to know about food, could ask simple questions that would be, you could ask a question that would be simple, like, what are the 5 mother sauces? Somebody that has worked over in France and is trained in classical French cuisine can name the 5 mother sauces. If I know the 5 mother sauces, this fool should know the 5 mother sauces. How do you fix a broken sauce? What's the difference between a brunoise and a bâtonnet? You can ask these questions to suss out their actual experience. Another one is questions that would be simple for somebody to answer had they actually worked with Gordon Ramsay will actually be extremely difficult. So what was it like working with Gordon Ramsay? They will give you a lot of things that are easy to reference from watching the shows. You know, well, he could be a jerk sometimes, but he's actually a really nice guy. You know, he always seemed to have his stuff together. Everything was always clean. Like, you know, his food was always fantastic. See, anybody can say that, right? What about a specific time when they were prepping a specific ingredient and he said a specific thing to them about a specific product and wanted a specific outcome? I'll give an example. So Marco Pierre White a while back, when he was new in a kitchen, one of the stories that he said was they actually razzed him in the kitchen. He had to push some kind of fat through a sieve. I think it was lamb fat, beef fat. If you know which fat it is, leave it in the comments. This is a really specific question. But anyways, whether it was pork fat, beef fat, or whatever, the point is they told him that he had this big vat of fat, and they wanted him to push it through the cone filter. He's sitting there for hours with like spatulas and whips and whatever, trying to like mush this very hard gelatinous fat through the cone filter. He's a brand new cook, right? Nobody told him that you're supposed to warm the fat up and it'll pass right through the cone filter. It'll take like 5 minutes. Nobody told him that because they were screwing with him. But my point is, he had that story to tell because he actually worked there. And he could tell that story. Gordon Ramsay has a story about how Marco Pierre White made him cry. Or at least Marco Pierre White has that story. I don't know if Gordon Ramsay talks about that too much. But Marco Pierre White made him cry. Marco Pierre White talks about problems that he had with Gordon Ramsay coming to his wedding with a camera crew. You know, because he actually knows Gordon Ramsay. So somebody that works with Gordon Ramsay, or they say that they were at Marco Pierre White's wedding, or whatever extraordinary thing you want to come up with, they worked directly under Wolfgang Puck for 5 years. They will have stories of specific things that Wolfgang Puck did. They'll have pictures on their phone. See this right here? This is when I was making this pressed duck, and he came up to me right after that, and he threw it. Whatever. I don't know. But you see what my point is? Expect for somebody lying on their resume about their experience to have a lot of vague answers for things. A lot of things that like a quick Google search can tell you. Not really any really valuable information. And this applies with most things when it comes to that. Now, if we use the drinking on the job, there's a lot of things that you can and can't ask in an interview. Like I said, not a police interrogation. So you can't sit there and try to drill into them. This gives you a sense of who the candidate is, right? So you ask these questions and you start getting this sense like the workplace was toxic because a lot of people that he worked with, we're talking about Mark the drunk, right? The workplace was toxic because a lot of people Mark worked with didn't like him. He didn't know why because he thought he was getting away with drinking on the job. But when he got let go, the executive chef said it was for drinking on the job. Then what's next is they will minimize behavior. Everybody was getting a shot at the bar after work. And like, I just had one, it was like 2 hours before my shift was supposed to end. And I went and I got a shot and then they treated it like it was like some huge deal. Like, come on, who doesn't have like a beer or a shot now and then? That may be true. He may have had a shot 2 hours before. But he doesn't talk about the big gulp of vodka and Mountain Dew that he brought in that he was drinking underneath that's a true story from I had to kick a guy out of the kitchen for drinking on the job. He came into work wasted and he started harassing one of the new cooks and started in the middle of service, pulled the new cook off the line and started showing him around at all the stuff and how this is wrong and this needs to be this way. And when I tried coaxing them, like, okay, we got to get back on the line. We're really busy, guys, whatever. Tried being nice at first. This is how I learned that sometimes it's not always about being nice. Sometimes you got to be a prick. And he started popping off. He was already being an asshole to the new cook, which I'm pretty sure that new cook, this was like almost 20 years ago at this point. The drunk guy that, he had that whole like, I worked here 20 years ago and I know more than everybody here. Like, that's great, but you came into work and wasted and you're dragging my new cook all over. He's supposed to be learning eggs and this is what you're doing. Like, come on, dude, come on. And I ended up kicking him off the line, and I was only a production lead at the time. I shouldn't have had authority to do it. I should have grabbed a real manager, so to speak. I got a story for you. I'm not going to do it here. Maybe I'll record another thing. Maybe I'll start a members only thing because it's a doozy. So, what's your greatest weakness is a total cliche question to ask, right? Like, everybody asks that question, but it's good. It is a really good question because it will weed out a certain amount of people. Each one of these questions will kind of get you closer and closer to the ideal candidate. This one is kind of a low bar to pass because most people have access to the internet. They have Google, and they will type in most popular interview questions, and what is your greatest weakness will pop up. Hopefully my video will pop up, and when it does, it talks about this is how you approach this question, this is what you say, blah, 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 and people will script their answers. Now, the thing about it, though, is that I would rather have somebody that took the time to script out an answer because, like I said, not a murder investigation. Script out your answer because the difference is when I ask you what's your biggest weakness and you tell me that you don't have any weaknesses, you can't pass that first lowest bar and tell me that you have a flaw. That tells me pretty much everything I need to know. Interview's over at that point, as far as I'm concerned. If you cannot tell me a weakness you have and like a step that you've taken towards fixing that weakness or addressing it, we're done. Because, like I said, this is standard. This is basic stuff. That being said, listen to their response. What are they saying? And you can decide whether or not that it's a valuable, positive answer. As far as other questions to ask, the video I blooped up a little bit ago has more of this kind of stuff. As far as like actual interview questions to ask and like how to be better at interviewing and stuff like that, that last video that I blooped up has a lot of that information. This is more about kind of a supplemental about how to add on and how to add value to your interview in order to get the most out of it. Let me know in the comments if you use any of these techniques yourself, or if you don't even interview and you just do working interview, or you just use the stage, or whatever it is you do. Let me know in the comments. Otherwise, you guys have an amazing day, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.